That night I had a dream. I drifted off thinking about happiness, birth, and new life. But now I was haunted by a vision of... He was horrible. The lone tweaker of the apocalypse. A man with all the powers of hell at his command. He could turn the day into night and laid to waste everything in his path. He was especially hard on the little things, the helpless and the gentle creatures.
He's running over fire hydrants.
He left a scorched earth in his wake, befouling even the sweet ocean breeze that whipped across his brow. I didn't know where he came from or why. I didn't know if he was dream or vision. But I fear that I myself had unleashed him. Welcome back to episode 40 of Super Mystery Bros, the show that attempts to answer nothing but the most hard-hitting questions in the universe. My name's Nate, and with me again is Kyle. Sorry, Kyle, I almost called you Ivan. Kyle, what's going on, man?
Oh, not much. Just being mistaken for Ivan, which doesn't happen very often.
Well, I saw Ivan last night, so you guys sound the same. You guys talk the same. I get you guys confused sometimes.
Very hard to distinguish.
Yeah. So what's going on?
Not much. I'm actually getting ready to head back home in about a month.
Oh, back to ground zero, huh?
Back to ground zero. Just go see. Yeah, just for about a week. Go see friends and family. Eat a lot of burritos.
First off, I just want to shamelessly beg our listeners to leave a rating and review on whatever app you're on, especially if you're on Apple Podcasts, because we really need help. Please hit the star rating on our show and write something in the box, and that's really all we ask of you. We don't need your money, just your moral support here. And if you're on Spotify, please rate our show as well. All right, Kyle, so what are we going to be talking about tonight?
Tonight we will be diving into the famous San Diego Tank Rampage of 1995. This actually went down just right in the backyard of where Nate and I grew up. This town of Claremont in San Diego, which actually just turned 75 years old this week. I actually saw that in the news just a few days ago. Claremont's celebrating their 75th year.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's the 30th anniversary of the Rampage in May. So we're coming up on the 30th anniversary of when this happened, and I thought it would be nice to talk about. So yeah, Kyle and I were both San Diego natives. We grew up in the neighborhood where this all happened, and we were all alive at the time. And I believe that we can offer somewhat of a unique perspective on the incident. So just a fair warning before we begin, it's possible that Kyle and I are going to go off-road from time to time on this one. So if that bothers you, that's fair warning. All right, before we begin, I'd like to just give a quick shout out to our sources, which are People Magazine, the San Diego Union Tribune, the documentary Cul De Sac, a Suburban War Story, the LA Times, and military-history.fandom.com. All links can be found in the description. All right, Kyle, are you ready to roll?
Ready to roll.
We begin tonight with the subject of crystal meth. It's cooked in filthy bathtubs using a smorgasbord of ingredients, like battery acid, Sudafed tablets, and even drain cleaner. It has the ability to keep oneself awake for days on end, induce paranoia, psychosis, and even violent outbursts. It has the power to create toothless smiles, rip families apart, and cause unspeakable amounts of damage to the communities affected by it. But is it a good idea to smoke it on a daily basis? Local San Diego man Shawn Nelson seemed to think so. Kyle, would you agree with Shawn on that?
I do not believe I would.
Yeah, I would say I completely disagree with that. Nowadays, you might have at least a few of these so-called tweakers in your town. Some can be seen rustling through dumpsters looking for junk to collect, or wandering suspiciously through unsecured construction sites looking all toothless and leathery. You may be neighbors with one who seems to collect large amounts of random, stolen, and discarded shit, or one that starts multiple DIY projects around their house without ever finishing a single one, leaving their backyard a torn-up, bombed-out mess that looks like it was hit by a JDAM. Some would describe Shawn Nelson as one such person, but it's important to note that he wasn't just born this way. After all, villains aren't born, they're made. To those who knew him, he was described as a pretty good guy. Neighbor Michelle Vermillion told People magazine, quote, "He was a very friendly guy, but we didn't really know what to think about him," end quote. His brother Kevin said, quote, "He was a guy everyone liked. He was no wacko," end quote. According to People magazine, Nelson was a bright, popular, and hardworking adolescent, and much like Darth Vader, he was once a small, innocent, and well-meaning child, but lost himself along the way, at some point becoming more meth than man. But to understand what happened to Shawn, you gotta understand who Shawn was.
Born on August 21st, 1959 in Birdseye, Utah, Shawn Nelson was the middle child to Fred and Betty Nelson, a custodian and an assembly line worker, respectively, and spent his childhood growing up in the Claremont area of San Diego.
Kyle, how would you describe Claremont in your own words?
Claremont, I mean, aside from home, Claremont's home. You know,
Yeah.
It's where I grew up. It's just super familiar, but it's also kind of, I say, like a melting pot. Not like racially. It's predominantly white and Hispanic, like most Southern California towns, just from people of all walks of life. You know, lower class, middle class, upper class. You know, it's you kind of got a little bit of everything in there, including your tweakers. You know,
The way I would describe Claremont, a lot of lower middle class white dude bros come from Claremont. I think that's in a nutshell, that's what it is.
I think that's where Dude Bros originated from, was Claremont. After graduating from Madison High School in 1977, Shawn enlisted in the U.S. Army and was trained at Fort Knox before then being assigned to a tank battalion in West Germany. However, by 1980, Shawn would be discharged from the Army due to what has been described as, quote, multifaceted disciplinary problems, end quote. Upon his return to San Diego, Shawn turned his attention toward a brand new life, a civilian life, and in the early 80s became a plumber, working 5 years for a company called Reasonable Plumbing, and at some point met and married the love of his life, Susie, in 1984. Quote, "We had a pretty good life for 6 years," his former wife Susie Hellman told the San Diego Union Tribune. "We owned a home. He was a successful plumber, and I was a legal secretary. We had it made," end quote. His brother Kevin told People magazine, quote, "Shawn had the world by the tail," end quote. However, you know what they say about good times, don't you? Yeah, good times never last. In 1988, Shawn's mother Betty passed away from cancer, causing him to begin a downward spiral with drugs and alcohol. By 1990, his wife Susie had enough of his shit and filed for divorce. Later that same year, a motorcycle accident left him with debilitating neck and back injuries, leading to a legal battle between him and Sharp Memorial Hospital, claiming that he was treated against his will. Unfortunately for Shawn, not only was his $1.6 million lawsuit thrown out in court, Sharp's countersuit of $6,640 for medical bills and legal fees was awarded to the hospital. Now that sounds like a tweaker thing to do, right? If you get in a wreck and you're all jacked up and they throw you in the back of an ambulance and they take you to the hospital to save your life, and then you fight with the hospital saying, "Oh, I didn't want you to save my life, now you owe me money."
Yeah, it definitely is. And, you know, I was actually born in Sharp Memorial Hospital, which is what makes this story even more hilarious to me. So anyway, misfortune began to pile on top of more misfortune for Shawn. In 1992, he lost his father to cancer. In just 4 years, he had lost his mother, his father, and his wife had left him. By this time, Shawn's behavior had become what some would describe as erratic, as he slipped further and further into meth and alcohol addiction. In the years leading up to the infamous incident, Police were called to Shawn's home a total of 9 times for various reasons, including but not limited to reports of domestic violence. He could even be seen mowing his lawn in the middle of the night without any regard for his neighbors. His home, including his backyard, looked like a bomb had hit it. It was covered with shit, including scrap metal, random auto parts, and garbage that any sane person would not attempt to hoard. Then, in June of 1994, Shawn's work van, which contained all of his plumbing tools, had been stolen. With debilitating back and neck injuries, no van, and no tools, he was left unable to generate any income for himself. He was now up shit creek without a paddle. Facing insurmountable financial problems, his utilities were eventually shut off, and his home was being foreclosed upon. However, Shawn was not a man to take it lying down, and came up with a brilliant solution to all of his problems.
You know, being a blue-collar guy myself, if your work vehicle is stolen with all your tools, you know, your tools that cost a ton of money that you've spent years putting together, that
you're fucked.
That make you money, yeah, it is pretty fucked. It's a nightmare scenario. Luckily, I've never had that happen. I've had a vehicle broken into, and luckily only company tools were stolen out of it. You know, but at the same time, if you've been working at a place for a while and you're well liked by your employer and your employees, usually if some shit like that happens, people around you will pitch in to try to at least get you to a working point. You know, you get the basic tools so you can keep doing your job.
Yeah, and I know this is like we're speculating a little bit too soon, but it seems to me like I bet one of his tweaker friends was the one that did that.
Quote, "He was kind of obsessed with the idea he had minerals in his yard," a neighbor said. "He installed a hot water heater for me and talked about mineral rights. He was going to sell his house for $1 million because he had all this gold and oil in his yard. I thought he was a little odd, a little kooky, but he was a nice man and gave me a nice price," end quote. And so it happened. Like an old-time prospector from the 1800s, Shawn dug a full-blown mine shaft in his backyard, having convinced himself that gold and other valuable minerals were buried there, right under his nose. Over the course of multiple months, Shawn could be seen digging and digging under the San Diego sun or by way of floodlights at 3 a.m. The hole he dug would eventually reach the depth of somewhere between 17 feet and 23 feet, depending on who you ask. Unfortunately for Shawn, striking gold in his backyard was never in the cards. It was too good to be true, and in the end, he found nothing of value. Bitter and broken, financially, physically, and emotionally, he had officially hit rock bottom. So much so, in his frustration, he even told one of his neighbors that, and I quote, "Oklahoma City was good stuff," end quote. A chilling reference to the recent April 1995 bombing.
Wow. Yeah.
It's a pretty fucked up thing to say that close to that tragedy.
Yeah, bitter and angry. Very bitter and angry. So, it isn't exactly clear what the last straw on the camel's back was for Shawn. Some say it was his mounting financial troubles. Some say it was the effects from his debilitating injuries. Some say it was his struggles with substance abuse. But perhaps it was something deeper, an unshakable belief that he was destined for something greater. What is clear, however, is that at about 6:30 p.m. on May 17th, 1995, a shirtless, sweaty, and wide-eyed Shawn drove casually through the wide-open gates of the National Guard Armory on Mesa College Drive in his battered tweaker van. He had arrived to achieve his final form. No longer would he settle for just being another T-800. He had yearned to become something more formidable. He was about to undertake his legendary transformation into the T-1000. Wasting no time, Shawn launched into action. He scrambled toward an M60A3 Patton tank, eyes blazing with manic determination. A heavy padlock stood in his way, but they were no match for his trusty bolt cutters. He snipped it off, flung open the hatch, and climbed inside. Heart pounding, breath ragged, he pressed the ignition button, and nothing. The tank wouldn't start. But failure was not an option. Shawn refused to lose. Undeterred, Shawn repeated the process, Once, twice, and finally on the third time, his efforts caught the attention of a passing guardsman who stopped dead in his tracks, trying to process the sight of this shirtless tweaker trying to break into one of the tanks. "Hey, stop!" the guardsman shouted. But it was too late. With a final, frantic effort, Shawn dropped inside, sealed the hatch behind him, and slammed the ignition switch. This time, the engine roared to life, sending vibrations through the 57-ton steel beast. The stunned guardsman, watching in sheer disbelief, had mere seconds to react. He knew it was do or die. Countless innocent civilian lives now hung in the balance. America was counting on him. In that moment, he recalled why he joined the Army in the first place, to be all he could be. In less than a heartbeat, he made a split-second decision shaped by his intense patriotism and battlefield experience, the most heroic course of action he could think of. He turned around, sprinted back inside the armory, and dialed 911. Davis, if we have audio of that, please roll a clip.
Ah! Call the police! Call the police! Call the police! Horrible! Horrible!
So, just to give a little bit of background about the tank itself, the M60A3 weighs about 57 tons. It's a main battle tank. The Army retired it shortly after the Gulf War of 91, but the National Guard kept them in use until they retired them in 1997. But nowadays, various militaries around the world still use them, but they're completely retired in the US. So basically, right after this incident, 2 years after this incident is when they went out of service.
I think another thing to point out, when Shawn jumps in this tank and he starts driving, so as we go forward and describe what's about to happen, the gun on the tank is actually pointed backwards. If you see the photos of this or watch the videos, if you're wondering to yourself why the gun is pointed backwards, it's because for main battle tanks, the gun points off the front of the vehicle so far that in storage, they take up less room if you spin the turret 180 degrees, so it points out the back.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
And without a gunner to help him, the gun was never turned around. People magazine wrote, quote, "To Ken Hunt, it seemed as if the apocalypse had come to Ashford Street. As Hunt prepared to lead a Bible study class at his San Diego home in the early evening of Wednesday, May 17th, the electricity suddenly went off, and the sound of grinding steel tore through the neighborhood. Hunt ran into his front yard only to find a 57-ton Army M60 tank rolling toward him. Quote, "Before I could say anything," says Hunt, 33, "it ran right over my truck," end quote. End of excerpt.
What a dick. He's just trying to lead a Bible study and you just run over his truck.
No kidding. Luckily for society at large, no ammunition was in the tank at the time, as all ammunition was being stored in a separate building. Yeah, could you imagine if this dude just starts lobbing main battle tank 105 millimeter shells through neighborhoods?
Oh, we'd be fucked.
Oh, yeah. Eventually, Nelson rampaged his way through quiet suburban streets, crushing parked cars, motorhomes, utility poles, fire hydrants, and anything else in his path, knocking out power to over 5,100 SD Genie customers in Linda Vista. Families who were just out for their evening strolls looked on in horror as this olive green army tank barreled down their once quiet street, crushing parked cars like Coors cans with a rapidly increasing police presence in tow. Eventually, he turned left onto Convoy Street, where the now famous footage of him running over a traffic light outside of the Wiener Schnitzel hot dog restaurant was shot by an onlooker with a camcorder. As far as I know, the Wiener Schnitzel, still there. Still there on Convoy.
Yeah, so quick personal note here. My mom's old boss. This was probably in the early 2000s. He was eating at that exact Wiener Schnitzel. This was several years later. And while he was in the middle of eating, he had a heart attack and died right there on the spot. And then also the Sears I worked at was just a little ways further down the same street. Just a couple blocks away. Yeah.
Well, you really shouldn't eat at Wiener Schnitzel too often.
That's probably the worst thing you could possibly eat. In the matter of mere minutes, Shawn had achieved a 6-star wanted level on the streets of San Diego, with police and news helicopters swarming him like a bunch of moths to a light bulb. and what seemed like the entire San Diego Police Department in hot pursuit. After his brief yet infamous shenanigans on Convoy Street, he turned left onto Balboa Avenue, past the Jack in the Box, and headed straight toward the 805 South on-ramp. Authorities were at a loss as to what to do, even floating the idea of requesting a Marine Corps Cobra attack helicopter from Camp Pendleton to fly down and deal with the tank. With tweaker rage now in full blast, Shawn set his sights on a new target, a pedestrian bridge. He aimed the 57-ton tank at the concrete pillars and slammed into them with full force, but to no avail. Undeterred, Shawn continued to rumble south down the 805 freeway before merging onto the 163 South, prompting police to shut down the entire freeway, leaving thousands of motorists stranded in gridlock. Ahead of him, open highway. Behind him, an endless motorcade of flashing red and blue lights. To his left, a concrete center divider separating him from the heavy northbound traffic. And beyond the side of the freeway, looming like a specter from his past, Sharp Memorial Hospital. It was his Moby Dick, the thing he blamed for his mother's death, his debilitating injuries, and his financial ruin. It was here, just north of the Genesee Avenue exit, that Shawn did the unthinkable.
Without warning, the tank veered left, barreling over the center divider. It slammed down in a cloud of dust and debris. But as the chaos unfolded, Shawn lost this reckless gamble. One of the tank's treads was torn off by the impact, and the tank was now stuck, teeter-tottering on top of the concrete center divide. For Shawn, this was the end of the line. Within seconds, 4 officers sprang into action, scrambling onto the immobilized tank. Among them was Officer Paul Paxton, a Marine Corps Reserve gunnery sergeant, who cut open the hatch with bolt cutters. Guns drawn, the officers peered inside and ordered Shawn to surrender. But by this point, Shawn was now more meth than man. He said nothing and just continued to desperately work the tank's controls, trying to free himself. Officer Richard Piner, Paxton's partner, stood frozen for half a second, heart throbbing in his chest. Shawn was still wrestling with the controls as his shirtless, chiseled torso glistened with sweat, refusing to surrender and desperate to get the tank moving again. Piner knew he had to act now, as the lives of dozens of motorists on the other side of that concrete barrier were at stake. He drew his pistol from the leather holster on his right hip and pointed it into the open tank hatch. With Nelson in his sights, Piner took a deep breath and squeezed the trigger. A single shot rang out. The bullet tore through Shawn's muscular upper right shoulder and neck. With a gasp, he slumped forward against the controls, shuddering, and just like that, it was all over. Ironically, the gravely wounded Shawn was pulled from the tank and rushed to Sharp Memorial Hospital, the very place many believed he had been on a mission to destroy, the place he blamed for everything wrong in his life. And now, in the end, the place that was fighting to save his life. However, despite the best efforts of doctors and paramedics, Shawn passed away from his gunshot wound shortly after arrival. He was just 35 years old.
From start to finish, the rampage lasted just 23 minutes. Over 40 vehicles were crushed, a mother and child suffered minor injuries, and a path of destruction from broken fire hydrants and traffic lights was left in his wake. Miraculously, aside from Shawn himself, nobody was killed. The world was left stunned and unsure of what they had just seen, and pondered whether there was some deeper meaning behind Shawn's rampage. Police Chief Jerry Sanders had no opinion on the matter, but did take a jab at the National Guard by stating, quote, "Don't leave the batteries and keys in the tank," end quote. However, the second half of that statement comes from a place of ignorance, as the tank does not require a key to start like a regular automotive does. So I want to tell you guys a story. So my grandpa, my dad's dad, was a career Marine. He was a tanker in the Marines for 29 years, and he moved to Hawaii, and it was right around this time, the time of the incident, 95, 96. I was a little kid. He came to visit us when we were living in Oceanside at the time. And the subject of this incident came up, and I asked my grandpa, "Hey, Grandpa, do you need a key to start a tank?" And he was not amused by that. He thought he looked at me like I was the dumbest motherfucker on the planet. And essentially the answer was no, you don't need a key to start a tank, because in the heat of battle, in the heat of combat, you don't want to lose a key and leave your tank stranded on the battlefield. So it's a push button to start a tank. So keys are not required to start. You just, as long as you've got access to the interior, you have full control over the tank.
Makes sense. Yeah, you don't want to be in a combat situation, jump in the tank, and then be like, who's got the keys? I lost my keys.
Yeah.
The National Guard responded to the intense criticism by moving all tanks out of storage at armories statewide, and the state of California paid $149,201 to cover damage done to property along Nelson's route. Some concerned citizens, particularly people who knew Shawn personally, questioned why the police had to shoot Shawn, when they could have just thrown tear gas into the hatch to force him out. However, Police Captain Tom Hall said that had Shawn been able to free the tank from the barrier, he, quote, could have taken out no less than 35 vehicles that were passing at that moment, end quote. Yeah, if you look at the video right when the tank gets stuck, and even as they're pulling Shawn from the tank when it's all over, there's still a constant flow of traffic on the opposite side of the freeway.
Cars are just flying by at this time. So if he had made it over the barrier, he could have easily killed multiple people.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is what, like 6:45 on like a Wednesday. So in 1995,
rush hour.
Yeah. Well, in 95, it's like the end of rush hour, because I don't think rush hour lasted 3+ hours back then. But just a constant flow of traffic, 5 lanes wide on the opposing side. Scott Nelson, one of 2 of Shawn's brothers, considered the police shooting of Shawn to have been completely justified. He stated, quote, I don't want to say anything about the police. They were doing their job, end quote. However, Shawn's other brother, Kevin, disagreed. Kevin told the documentary Cul De Sac, a Suburban War Story, quote, first time I saw it, I was like, how cool. I wish that would have been me. Up to that point, but I didn't know it was him, because it would have been something I would have liked to have done, end quote. He went on to say, quote, he was a good guy, great brother, good citizen, good person to follow, end quote.
So what do you think about that?
Well, I think the dude's brother is going to have a biased opinion about him.
Don't you think it's a bit hypocritical of him to say, wow, that's so cool, I wish that would have been me, and then being all sad about the incident once he realizes it's his brother? You know what I mean? A little hyprical, maybe.
I mean, yeah, a little bit, I mean, sure, taking
I would say a lot.
Yeah, taking a tank on a joyride and just running over things, When I saw that documentary and I heard him say that, I just thought to myself, the brass balls on this guy to say that and think that that's a good thing to say, Yeah. After everything that happened, yeah. It sounds all fun, taking a tank on a joyride until the end result is the driver's death.
Yeah. All right, well, here are some theories. So, the following info comes from the San Diego Union Tribune in an article entitled, Tank Rampage, a Symbolic Story Turns 20. Quote, at home and abroad, broadcasters airing this dramatic footage stressed one theme, insanity. In one segment, a British reporter referred to Nelson as madman, deranged driver, enraged outlaw, maniac, and lunatic. Others, though, believed this was a man undone by addiction. Quote, amphetamines makes people nuts and aggressive and violent, end quote, said Dr. Mark Kalish, a San Diego psychiatrist. Quote, you could call 100 guys who deal in this field and 99 would tell you, this guy was on amphetamines, end quote. Methamphetamine users, Kalish said, are prone to heart attacks, strokes, and delusions. Some become convinced that random innocents are evildoers who must die, or that the users themselves must commit. Quote, give me a heroin user anytime over amphetamines, end quote, the psychiatrist said. Because addictions have plagued humanity for eons, Kalish Kalish has little patience for those who see Nelson's tragedy as a symbol of late 20th century economic woes. Quote, "What the hell," Kalish asked, "does this have to do with the demise of the middle class?" End quote. The loss of middle-class jobs, including those at San Diego's defunct General Dynamics plant, is central to Cul De Sac, a Suburban War Story. This 2002 documentary from Coronado native Garrett Scott presented North Claremont as a neighborhood of deteriorating homes and dashed hopes, whose residents deadened their pain with drugs and alcohol. Quote, "Those were some dark times for San Diego," said Lambert DeVoe, who worked on the film with Scott, who died from a heart attack in 2006. "In 1 year, 40,000 engineers were laid off from General Dynamics," end quote. Susan Faludi, the feminist writer, struck a similar chord in Stiffed. In this 1999 book, Faludi argued that powerful forces had betrayed the American male, so one American male chose to fight back. Quote, "If a man could not get the infrastructure to work for him," Faludi wrote, "he could at least tear it down. If a nation would not provide an enemy to fight, he could go to war at home. If there was no brotherhood, he would take his stand alone." Shawn Nelson's sense of desperation, if not his actions, were shared by many men of his generation, end quote. Quote, "I just find that ridiculous," said Nelson's ex-wife. "We had it all early on. He was an intelligent man who had a great way with customers. He just abused drugs. That's it," end quote. End of excerpt. Wow, okay, so who do you think is most on the right track here?
I think his ex-wife. He abused drugs, meth. It makes you crazy. It makes you do crazy things. I mean, you and I have seen it, maybe not personally. We've never, well, I don't know about you, but I've never personally watched someone change into a totally different person through methamphetamine use. But, I've met tweakers. I've been to tweaker houses. I've seen what they look like. Yeah.
Yeah, I found it kind of ridiculous, too, that this Susan Faludi is kind of trying to place the blame on just economic woes. And what did she say? She said something like he stood up, like he couldn't get the infrastructure to work for him, and he went to war at home. And it's so ridiculous because what they're referring to is the shutdown of General Dynamics, which, yes, Shawn Nelson's dad worked for General Dynamics, but it shut down long after that guy retired, So this was not part of his story necessarily. He was a plumber. He didn't work for General Dynamics, and from all accounts, he was quite successful as a plumber in his early life. So yeah, he just got involved with drugs. I completely agree with his wife. You know?
The whole shutdown of General Dynamics, right? It really it's a central part of that Cul De Sac documentary that both of us watched. That they blame that for this up and coming Claremont, San Diego area being like upper middle class, suddenly kind of taking like a nosedive because 40,000 people were laid off in a year, which, in something the size of Claremont, that could totally shift your economy, right? And because of that, some people turn to drugs, to selling, to using, So I don't know if the Faludi quote is taken out of context because it's just a small snippet, or if she's really kind of just blaming that on what Shawn Nelson did, which, you're right, would be bullshit.
The only way I could see the shutdown of General Dynamics having an effect on Shawn and ultimately causing this is if the overall shutdown of General Dynamics caused drugs to enter Claremont and people use that to cope, and then he getting himself involved with the wrong people, and then they started to drag him down. Do you know what I mean? Like kind of through the butterfly effect.
Yeah.
But to suggest that the shutdown of General Dynamics affected him directly,
no,
and caused him to do that, I think that's bullshit.
That is bullshit. Yeah, but the Cul De Sac documentary, that's kind of what it ties into, is the shutdown of General Dynamics. didn't introduce methamphetamine use. I think it was already there. In the documentary, they said at the end of World War II, soldiers were bringing this stuff back from the overseas fights. Bombers used it to stay awake for 24-hour-long bombing missions, And when the war ended, a lot of the Pacific Fleet just landed in San Diego and were discharged at the end of the war. And that's what some people accredit to the introduction of methamphetamine into the U.S. It began in San Diego. So the stuff was already there. And yeah, the shutdown, 40,000 people being laid off in a year, they believe that drove a lot of people to use methamphetamine to cope with being jobless, and that kind of, like you said, butterfly effect, that long-term ripple effect kind of put Shawn Nelson living in this neighborhood where you have a lot of tweakers, a lot of users, the stuff is readily available, Yeah,
I mean, okay, so regarding the documentary, I couldn't tell if the documentary was supposed to be serious or like it balanced the line between satire and serious. You know what I mean? Because all the characters that they interviewed they seemed like they would be characters from a Reno 911 skit. Did you ever see that show?
Yeah, but Reno 911 was also made 20 years later. Where we find the absolutely ridiculous a little more funny. The documentary seems serious to me. You got to remember when it was made. But yeah, everyone they interviewed were tweakers or former tweakers. All of them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, we got to go over a few things. So there's a lady that they're interviewing. She's talking faster than her mouth can even move, and just high out of her mind on meth while she's being interviewed for this documentary. And then Shawn's friend Chuck, the guy who sounds and looks like Bobo from Finding Bigfoot.
Yeah.
He said that he was the one who broke Shawn's back, and it was during an altercation with him. And so I'm not sure how that factors into the story about him breaking it in a motorcycle accident. Did you find that kind of confusing too?
Now that you bring it up, yes.
So he says that Shawn and him had a heated argument, and then they took it outside and into Shawn's backyard. And during that fight, Chuck, Shawn's friend, broke his back, and then they had to call the paramedics. Which, that leads me to believe that this motorcycle story is probably bullshit. It may be something that the family told other people to make it seem more legit, or make Shawn into more of a sympathetic character by blaming it on an accident. Do you know what I mean?
That makes sense. Because in the documentary, the whole fight was Shawn's idea, and it wasn't much. It was more of a wrestling thing than a fist fight, just to prove, male dominance over this much larger
according
dude.
To that guy, though. According to that guy,
true. Yeah. That's the other thing about the documentary, right? I watched the whole thing, right, and then when it was all over, and I'm doing a little more research, and I'm reading this script and getting some more information, I'm like, well, that clashes with the documentary, and then it hit me. Everyone interviewed in the documentary was a tweaker. You really can't trust anything they say.
Yeah. So, like I said, the documentary, it's great if you want to do some further research yourself. It'll be in the episode description, the link to the YouTube video. But then there was also the guy with the hat and the mustache, and he was talking about this laser device that somebody invented in the early 80s that could control people's minds. And he's talking about it completely seriously. This is why I was asking if this documentary was supposed to be serious or if it was supposed to be satire, because they interviewed the most ridiculous people imaginable, right?
So that guy that had these weird conspiracy theories, that didn't start coming out to the second half of the documentary. He seemed like the only dude they interviewed with a straight head on his shoulders. And then the instant they interviewed the fast talking lady, Karen, And she said that this was the guy that was like leading Shawn down the wrong path. He was like his most negative influence. I was like, well, that doesn't make sense. Like, he seems to be like the least tweaker out of all of you. And then as soon as they go back,
that's the one you got to watch out for.
As soon as they go back to him, he's talking about all these crazy conspiracy theories. At one point, he's like smoking a cigarette that's like about to like burn his fingers. And I don't know if you noticed, like the camera zooms in on this thing and the dude is way too into what he's talking about to notice this this cherry getting closer and closer to his bare skin. Yeah, the dude was suddenly on one. Yeah, it's like, oh, yep, you used to be a tweaker too. All right, you might still be.
Of course, I mean. And that whole scene, you know, that scene with Rod Luck from KUSI going into the house, that blew my mind because, so Rod Luck, he was a reporter for a local station KUSI, and it's so he's outside the house. There's just like these random people just like lingering on his lawn and like in his house, and he's like, oh, who are you, what's your name? And he can't get a straight answer out of anybody. He's asking them like, oh, who are you, what's your name, do you live here? And these random tweakers aren't giving him straight answers, but one of them invites Rod Luck into the house, and as they walk into the house is just trashed. I mean, there's just shit everywhere in Shawn's house. I mean, there's just like dirty dishes completely covering the counters and his sinks in his kitchen. Just like random shit everywhere. It's disgusting. And then the news team is navigating through this maze into the backyard, and this guy's like showing Rod Luck the mine shaft that Shawn dug. And then all of a sudden, this crazy tweaker lady comes in and starts screaming, who the fuck are you? Get the fuck out. You know, just starting to cuss Rod Luck out and screaming at the news team to get the fuck out. Rod Luck's like, whoa, you know, calm down. You know, what's your name? Who are you? Do you live here? And she's just like, none of your fucking business, and blah, blah, blah. And it's just one of these bizarre moments on television where, yeah, it's you got to see it for yourself. And if you watch this documentary, you can.
Yeah, it was a very bizarre moment for live television, but, you know, coming from someone who hung out with some of the wrong people, you know, in his late teens, I never did methamphetamines, but I've seen the scene. You know, I've seen the houses that look like that. I've seen the people that act like that. It's a totally
it's classic.
Yeah. It's a classic scene played out in tweaker environments. Yeah. You know. Yeah, Rod Luck had no idea what was going on. He had never seen anything like it.
Yeah, why do you think Shawn did this in the first place, man?
You know, so once again in the Cul De Sac documentary, where you can't really trust everything these tweakers say, but a couple of them, at least 2 or 3 of them, did say Shawn used to talk about getting in a tank and parking it on City Hall, on the steps of City Hall, right, to get attention, to get a message across. Yeah. So the idea was like he hit a snapping point and was like, I'm finally gonna do this. I'm gonna steal a tank because it's basically like right across the street. You know, he lived right just blocks from the armory, and just go park it on City Hall. So he hops in a tank and starts driving, and probably high out of his mind has no idea where he's going. You know. I'm surprised he made it onto the freeway.
Okay, so do you think that was his plan, though? Do you think he was really heading to City Hall? And
I think that is the initial plan, and I think that once he started driving and running over shit, I think the combination of adrenaline of doing this plus whatever was in his system probably just snapped his mind in half, and there was suddenly no more plan. You know, I don't know where he was going. He probably didn't know where he was going. But I think that initial get me out of the house, take me to where the tanks are, I do believe he was going to make good on his promise of, I'm going to drive a tank onto the steps of City Hall so I can get attention.
See, I think what happened was he was going to head towards Sharp Memorial Hospital first. And like instead of taking the legit way, like going on the Genesee exit and then crossing the freeway to get to the other side of the freeway, he was like, I've got all these cops following me. I'm just going to bust through this barricade and lose the cops so that I have free reign to do whatever I want to Sharp Memorial Hospital for, a couple minutes. And then from there, I think he was going to like maybe head to City Hall. But I think he busted through that barrier expecting it to just fold over like a wet paper bag, so to speak. And then he was going to go bust through, maybe do some damage, and then head off and continue his rampage somewhere else. But
I do think that's why he busted through the barrier, but I don't think he planned that out ahead of time.
No, I think his emotions got the best of him, and he was like, "No, fuck this, I'm going for it." And it did not work out for him.
Yeah, the whole left track blew off immediately, and it high centered onto all the concrete. I think if he had hit it like straight on, because tanks are designed to go over and through anything. If he had hit it straight on, he wouldn't have even slowed down. But
he would have probably gone over it. But those things are pretty fucking strong. Those center dividers.
Oh yeah. But yeah, he hit it at like a 45-degree angle, and it jacked that tank up pretty good. Yeah.
Before we end this, we gotta address some controversy here. Do you think that the police were in the right for shooting him, or do you think that his tweaker friends are in the right for saying that they should have just tear gassed him? Why did they have to shoot him?
I think in the moment, seeing it from the police's point of view, right? You're on top of this tank, right? You're shouting at the driver to surrender, right? And he is trying frantically to move this tank forward. And you look at what's in front of you, and it is just an onslaught of vehicles at 65 plus miles an hour coming down the freeway, 4 or 5 lanes wide. And you're like, if this dude does get this thing off the barrier, now we're looking at serious risk to civilian life, innocent bystanders, and the tank is finally stopped after 23 minutes of adrenaline fueled, this dude is gonna kill someone if he's not stopped immediately. The whole tear gas thing, that's a planned thing, like if the tank had high centered and turned off, it just stalled. Maybe they would have backed off and made some calls, because I don't think cops just carry tear gas in their vehicles. They would have had time to come up with a more tactical, non-lethal plan. But I think in the moment, that one officer was right.
It was pretty urgent. The situation was urgent. And if he had gotten that tank unstuck and onto the other side of that median, he definitely would have killed someone. I mean, traffic is flying by at 70 miles an hour on that side. Yeah. And it's like one of the officers said, he could have crushed no less than 35 cars if he had broken himself free. So
to play devil's advocate, since the left track is blown off, I'm not a tank operator, but I'm pretty sure the thing, if it got unstuck, would only go in very tight circles. But
that's still enough to kill someone in the fast lane.
Yeah.
Just flying by in the fast lane.
This is true. Yeah, but I think if he did get it unstuck, he wasn't going to keep running. He wasn't going to drive across all these lanes. I think he still wouldn't have gone very far. But also being an officer who's also not a tank operator, also might not even known that tread is blown off, because that's on the other side of the rail from where they're all parked.
Actually, the officer, the Paxton guy, he was a Marine Corps reservist, and he was a tanker.
But he wasn't the one that pulled the trigger.
No, it was his partner. But yeah. He knew how dire the situation was.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, to me, what else are the police supposed to do? I mean, it's like you have this maniac who won't listen to orders, who's in control of a 57-ton tank, and it's teeter-tottering on the center divider with traffic flying by at 70 miles an hour, and you're supposed to just tear gas the guy? No. You're supposed to eliminate the threat, pull the guy out, get in there yourself to shut off the tank and neutralize it. You can't do that if you throw tear gas in. The tank's still going to be running, maybe spinning its treads. I don't know. But you're supposed to just immediately take out the threat and I think that's exactly what they did. And
yeah, remove the threat. And I wouldn't even call it excessive force because the dude didn't mag dump into the tank. He didn't just unload his gun. It was one shot, right? It was one well-placed shot, right? Whether he meant it to be lethal or not, I don't know. But he did mean to hit the threat and make him no longer a threat, you know?
Yeah. Considering all the circumstances, I think the police, they were correct in their decision.
I agree.
So. All right, man. Is there anything else you want to go over before we end this?
I don't think so.
All right. Do you have any apologies, shout outs, or clarifications?
Shout out to Claremont, you know, home sweet home.
Anyone in particular?
I don't know, family, grandma. I'll shout out to grandma who actually lived in Bay Park, just 5 minutes from Claremont. But she actually passed away last week, and that's why I'm going home next month to see everyone.
I'm sorry to hear that. Is that the one who banged her head and Rambo crawled?
Yeah. Super grandma. Yeah. A few years back, grandma tripped and fell in her home and cracked her head open. And when my dad came over to check on her, she was cleaning up the blood herself, didn't want to go to the hospital. Was only mad because she had just got her hair done, you know, and now there's blood in her hair. But no,
mad respect.
Yeah. I appreciate it, but nobody feel bad for my grandma. She was 98. She won at life. She lived in her home this whole time, right? She was completely independent up until the last year or so, right? She has won at life. You know, she got
victory laps.
Oh, she did. She's got to see so many grandchildren, and she's even got to see the birth of a few great grandchildren. Right.
Damn.
She won. She won the game. And yeah, so shout out to grandma. She was the best. Nobody feel bad for grandma. Everyone be happy that she's now in a better place.
Well, right on, man. So real quick, I just want to say R.I.P. Mario, the guy who died at Wiener Schnitzel in the early 2000s. He was a nice guy. I knew him personally. And yeah, what a way to go. I'm sorry, Mario. Rest in peace, man.
Wow, I'm sorry for giggling at your unfortunate death, Mario. That was funny to me. Dying of a heart attack inside a Wiener Schnitzel.
Yeah, it's hard for me not to laugh either. But yeah, R.I.P. Mario.
Well, it's good to know he was a good dude.
As far as I know, he was. He always treated me with respect.
Right on.
All right, man. I think it's time to get out of here. Like sands through the hourglass, so too are the minutes of our podcast. But don't fret, dear listener. We'll be back again to breathe new life into an old mystery next time.
Remember, folks, the truth is out there, somewhere in the ether. And through our powers combined, we'll solve that sumbitch once and for all.
This is Super Mystery Bros. So, did you hear what scientists said about the Grand Canyon? Do you know how the Grand Canyon was formed?
Water over a gajillion years?
No, that's what they thought originally, but now scientists are saying that it was actually a prehistoric tweaker digging for some buried conduit.
I knew it'd be a tweaker joke. I knew it. I saw that one coming a mile away. A prehistoric tweaker digging for conduit. I gotta get that copper, man.